Hello, good morning. Did you have a great day yesterday at the conference? Of course, because NDC Oslo is also always perfect, right? So thank you for coming here. I'm Anders Abel. I run a small Swedish consultancy company in Stockholm, Sweden, SAAS. When I explain this to my kid, I say that I do build login buttons. And then once they told me that that can't be too hard. But as you know, it can be sometimes hard. And even worse is the logout button, as we will see in a while. So we have some SAML2 components that are open source and work extensively with Duendo software and Duendo Identity Server. And in my consulting work there, I've come across a number of architectural patterns for OpenID Connect that I want to share with you. But first, just a quick rehearsal. How does it work, the basics? Well, we have a user running the browser on their laptop. They want to access a client application, and the sign-on happens on an OpenID provider. So the user browser makes a request to the client application. The client application responds with a redirect to the OpenID provider. The browser follows the redirect, and then the OpenID provider somehow authenticates the user. Exactly how that is done is not part of the OpenID Connect spec, and that's kind of the point with it. The idea here is that OpenID Connect lets a client application defer user authentication to a provider, and the provider can authenticate the user the best way that provider sees fit. And the client application do not have to bother if authentication methods are updated, changed, different for different users. All of that complexity is handled by the OpenID provider. Once the OpenID provider is happy and has established the identity of the user, the OpenID provider will set a cookie on the provider or some other kind of local storage, session storage, something to establish a session on the provider. And we are then redirected back. So there is a redirect being returned by the OpenID provider, and the user's browser follows the redirect to the client application. The client application can, typically there is some back channel interaction involved. We can see the details in a while. And then the client application can set a cookie and establish a session. So this is kind of the starting point here. That I've done too many talks on the basics of OpenID Connect and OAuth 2, the flows. And I wanted to look beyond that and say that, well, once you are done with this, what do you do now? What's the next logical step? But before that, we can actually have a look quickly at an application. So I have my Web 1 application, and I assume you're all happy this is not a web design seminar, because I'm not a web designer. There's at least a secure page here, so if I try to click the secure page, I will be redirected. Sorry, I should bring up the browser DevTools first. And let's see if I can make that larger. Yep. So I do click. I reload the page. I do click secure. I got redirected to the authorized endpoint, and we can see that in the redirect here, the client application included some parameters. It says that once you are done, provider, please return the user here to /signin-OIDC. I want an ID token back, pure OpenID Connect. I want to know profile, some basic information about the user. And I want the response to be sent back in the form of a posted form data. Let's log in. And we are logged in. We can see that the client application now got a number of claims from the upstream provider. So we know that this is Alice Smith that just logged in. If we check the call to sign in OIDC, there is an ID token in here which contained the information and is also cryptographically signed, so the client application could verify it and ensure that this indeed was created and not tampered with. It was indeed created by the right provider, and it has not been tampered with before we got here. So we are happy. We could log in with one client application. What's next? Well, if we are here, why not add another client application? So now I have another client application, and this is a single sign-on pattern, the most basic one. And probably the first thing that user sees as a benefit with this kind of solution is that the user can now navigate to another client application. It redirects to the OpenID provider. On the OpenID provider, there is a cookie, there's a session cookie. So there is already an established session, so there is no need for the user to re-authenticate. We can just get the redirect back and be signed on immediately again. So let's have a look at how that works. If I go to Web 2, let's bring up the dev tools again, move them to the side, and click Secure. We can see that I never really had to interact with the upstream provider. It just worked. If we go to the upstream provider and have a look, we can see that in the bookkeeping the provider does, it now knows that both Web 1 and Web 2 joined this distributed session. Both are in there. I want to quickly show you the handshake here, though, because it's a bit different. So the Web 1 application used the most basic implicit flow, which is really not recommended anymore for security purposes, but it makes a great demo because everything is visible on the query string and the browser dev tools. Web 2, on the other hand, I used .NET 9 that has support for both the authorization code flow for handling the response and for pushed authorization request for the initial request. So if we look at the authorized endpoint, we'll see none of those parameters that we had before, just a reference. So what happened really is that the client application made a direct server-to-server call from the client, the web server, directly to the OpenID Connect provider, saying, hey, here are my parameters to the authorized endpoint. It's the same parameters again. It's the redirect URI, it's the scopes, it's the client ID, all of that. And then it got a reference, a ticket. It's like when you handed in your jacket in the wardrobe. You get the ticket back. And now, when the identity provider should process this, it just gets the ticket number and goes to its store and see, okay, we have a request URI 326 something. Let's see, where did you have that? Oh, here's the note with the parameters that we should use. And the same way on the return, in the call to sign in OIDC, it just includes a code, which is a reference to, which enables the client to fetch the actual information using a server-to-server call. And this is more secure because it keeps all the interesting stuff out of the browser. It's also horrible from demo purposes because all the interesting stuff is hidden from view from the browser. So, we are signed on. And this is what users mostly care about, right? Being signed on. Do they care about sign off? Okay, well, let's see. I made a naive implementation of sign off in my Web 1. So let's go here, press Logout, and then as a user, I'm careful. I want to check that I'm really signed out. What will happen now if I click secure? I'm logged in immediately. I'm single sign on. So essentially, I mean, this is a valid sign out. I did remove the Web 1 session cookie. But thanks to the provider still having the cookie, I'm immediately signed on again. So whenever you do single sign on, you also need single logout. It's not enough to just log us out of this application. To make a working logout button in the Web 1 application, we need to also log out of the upstream provider. So we're in this situation. We press logout here. We clear the cookie here. This is what I did so far. but now I realize I need to clear the cookie on the provider. Now, the provider runs on another host. I can't issue a set cookie from my client application that alters the cookies on the OpenID Provider host. That would be a huge breach of the basic principles of security on the web. I need to somehow make the browser make a request to the OpenID Provider so that the OpenID Provider can issue a set cookie header that removes the cookie. We do that through a redirect to the end session endpoint on the OpenID Provider. Now the OpenID Provider can go ahead and remove its cookie. So let's add that. I have my naive logout here. It's called sign out async to sign out on the local session. Do you see at the back? Is it large enough? Good. So let's add something more. Redirect to localhost 5000. So how do I find that? Well, the easiest way is to go to the OpenID Provider, check the discovery document that the OpenID Provider publishes, which contains all of the endpoint addresses. So I can just copy it and save inside typing. So let's go back to my Web 1 application. Give it a second to reload. And if I now click Logout, it logged out on the local client, and then it redirected to the OpenID Provider, where I get a confirmation. Would you like to log out of Identity Server? Yes, you're now logged out. If I now go back to my Web 1 application, I try to click secure, we can see that I am indeed signed out. I got to the login page again. Let's log Alice in again. So doing a logout is a state-changing operation. And we should never do a state change on a GET request. That's why my logout, so this link here is actually a button submitting a form, and this is HTTP post that processes the logout here. But then I do a redirect to connect as end session. And that's why the Identity Server in this case requires another confirmation. It can't just complete the logout on a pure GET. It also wants to get a post, or if we could have some other means of cross-site request forgery protection in this one. So to do cross-site request forgery protection, the idea is that you send something along with a request that authenticates the request. In this case, the client needs to prove to the OpenID Provider that this is indeed a valid client, is participating in the session, and we may also want to prove to it that we are actually what user, what session ID is it that we want to sign out. One thing that the client got right away from the start during authentication that contains all of this information is the ID token. So let's log back in. I've configured my client application to save the ID token. So the ID token is available in the session of the client application. So let's go grab it. ID token equals await HTTP context .get token async ID token. And now we can include the ID token here on the request. ID token hint. It says hint because this is an old ID token. The ID token was valid for the handshake, and then we just keep it around, and it has already expired when we want to sign out an hour later. So it's not a valid ID token in the means that we can use it to establish a session anymore, but we can use it as a hint. It's good enough for logout. ID token hint equals, and then we'll just pick up the ID token here. So if I go back, let's expand the browser down tool so we get the details. I click logout. we see that I no longer have the confirmation page. And if I check the end session, there's now an ID token hint parameter being included in the redirect to the OpenID provider. Another thing we might want here is to have the OpenID provider being able to return back to the client application. So if the user clicked logout or at our client application up there, it makes sense to allow the user to end up on the client application again at logout. Especially in some, we will look shortly at the federation gateway pattern, where the OpenID provider is really just an intermediate stepping stone that the user never sees. It wouldn't make sense for the user to end up there. So we can supply also on this one, a post logout redirect URI when we make the request, and we can say that we want to go back just to the root of the application. But then this could potentially be an open redirect. So we need to pre-register that on the client. So if I go to the settings for this client on the OpenID provider, I'll do post logout redirect URIs, and I'll add it to the collection of valid post logout redirect URIs. So this prevents an open redirect. And thanks to the ID token in the audience field, it contains the client ID of the Web1, because the audience indicates that this ID token was sent to Web1. And the identity provider here can read it back and see that, okay, this logout request came back now through the ID token hint from Web1, and it asks for redirect to this post logout redirect URI. Let's see if that's valid. Yeah, it's in the configuration, it's fine. And now I hope I talked long enough for it to reload. Secure. Logout. You are now logged out. No, I did something wrong. Was it? I didn't save this file. That was I hope it was just that, because I tend to forget exactly where they need underscores and not. Yeah, it worked. I now have a link to return to the Web1 application. Let's just see here. Let's do another thing. We log in back in. And let's log back into Web2. So now I'm logged in on Web2. I'm logged in on Web1. That also means that if I check the identity provider, I'm logged in on the identity provider. I have a session all 3 of them. Let's click logout here. And then check here. Web2 is still signed on. So this wasn't really all. We probably want to clear this session as well. Another thing also, if we go here, if we do log out from the identity provider, we should also probably log out of Web1. So we need the logout button to be able to work from wherever origin we start. Let's start with a case where we click logout on the identity server. So on this page, it said you are logged out. Actually, it means logging out, because on that page, there is a mechanism to include a hidden iframe that may causes the browser to make a request to any other clients participating in the session, where it can clear the cookie. Because the OpenID provider can, of course, not clear the cookie on one of the client applications. It needs to be a browser request involved. So let's add support for this. So first we need to tell the identity provider that it should indeed do a invoke it, notify front channel logout URI. Localhost 5001/account/log logout. But this will be a GET request. So it should be post only here. So we need to do an async task action result logout. I'll explain. I just need to add something to get a different signature, because otherwise it's not valid C#. Here we can do await HTTP context dot sign out async and then just return. Okay. So let's go back to here. Identity server, we are not web 1. Oh, I need to sign on. Now we are signed on. I go back here, I see I'm signed on. I'll open the browser DevTools to see what's happening. Log out, yes. We can see that there was a request being sent to localhost 5001 account logout, which is our Web 1 application. So if I now go and click Web 1 application, I was signed out. Checking the contents of the page. There is a hidden iframe. Actually, for the implementation reasons, it's a nested hidden iframe. Here. iframe loading eager. Here's the request to the Web 1 application happening. This also means that the logout, you are now logged out. This page is not something just being put here for some reason. It's actually an important page because it contains the logout logic. I've seen it a couple of times that teams have implemented identity server, development teams, and then handed it off to a designer team to just polish it up before deployment. You know, changing the logo, colors, everything to match the styling of that specific organization. And the UI team, not being an OpenID Connect experts, removed this page or simplified it, and logout was broken. So it's just something to keep an eye on. So this works well. Let's see an edge case that affects 30%, is it about, of the users now using Safari on the internet? So it's not a small edge case. It also applies to people using Brave and other more geeky browsers that have more extensive privacy protection enabled, but Safari is by far the largest one. So Safari is very strict about third-party cookies. So if this deployment is cross-site, so the client application and the OpenID provider are on different sites. Here in Europe, it's a common thing. I mean, we have corp.no, corp.se, and then the IDP is a shared provider, which is login.corp.com. Then we are cross-site. Then Safari would say that, hey, yeah, it's great that you make a request to another domain here. And there is a cookie. The cookie should be included, but Safari will block it for privacy reasons, because Safari can't see the difference between our legitimate OpenID Connect distributed session and an ad network tracking our activities across the web. So the client application might, as a backup, the client application might send a blind set cookie header to remove the cookie on the response if there was no incoming header. I mean, if you're not signed in, it doesn't matter to really emphasize that you should not be signed in. But as far as I know, Safari blocks this as well. And to me, this is a severe security risk. Because when a user gets that message, you are logged out. It means that if I have a borrowed device or I'm at a public device, when I see the message, you are logged out, I assume it's safe to walk away and leave that computer, and no one else can go there and access my personal data. So if sign-in would fail, you have the user within 10 seconds on the service desk hotline. But if logout fails, the user probably never notice. And they are up for, and they are put at risk. So we need something better. So there is a mechanism called backchannel logout. It starts the same. The client redirects to end session, but in this case, the OpenID Connect provider can send a backchannel call directly to server-to-server communication to the other application saying that, hey, the session ID for 731 something for subject, that is user number 1, should now be logged out. The problem here is that the client cannot immediately clear the cookie, because this is a backchannel call server to server, but where is the cookie? The cookie is in the user's browser. So somehow the client now needs to take note of this and keep a note around, and whenever there is a request coming in, it needs to check, is this session already logged out? I added that to Web 2. Unfortunately, this is not, there is no built-in support in the Microsoft handlers to do this, but let's do a full login here to both client applications. And let's see, where should we do this? We can do it here. We press logout once more in Web 1. If I now go here, I thought I would be logged out. What did I forget? We can return to Web 1 information. Oh, joys of demos. Joys of demos. Now I see I forgot another thing. Let's go back and add that before and see if I can find out in the meantime what I forgot. So let's just talk about the logout here, because I did put the user at risk inadvertently. Let's come back to Web 1, secure alice. And on Web 1, remember I said that logout should be a post, but I now open it up as a get because I need that for the purpose of the to be able to listen to the response. Let's log out, say 1, 2, 3. So I logged out just by a pure GET request. But when the identity server renders, let's go back here, I had it here. Oh, I didn't have this one. When the OpenID Provider renders the logout request, it includes the session ID, so we can validate here that the session ID of the incoming logout request matches the current session ID I have here. So current SID equals HTTP context.user.find first value SID, and check if SID, the one we received, equals the current SID. Then we'll do the logout, and only then. Now we've secured this. Now let's see, what did I did set up a backchannel logout, you're right there. Let's just try again. If we are lucky, it was just some bad luck. So Web 1, Web 2, Web 1 signs in. It could be that I just screwed up the sessions. No, it wasn't. It's something else that I failed. How I love demos. Okay, the intention, I can just show you what it was here. There is a backchannel logout where it should accept the logout token and check the sub and SID matches. Then it stores the logout, adds this to a list of revoked sessions. And every time I make a GET request, I check if the user is in the list of rejected sessions. I'll make sure this works before and then push it to GitHub so you can have if you want to check the working solution. But the principle is in here. Let's move on to something that I hope works in the demo then. I want to talk about Federation Gateway. So now we've learned how to set this up. So our managers, they are happy, right? They ask us to set up an integration with an Entra ID. Because most customers of this company we work at, they use Entra ID. And then some customers use Google Workspace, and some customers even use an on-premise custom provider. So our client application now has integrated with 3 of them. And to do such an integration, one is the technical challenges, but more of it is the organizational and communication challenges. Because if you set up a client application with an external, especially the custom partner provider, you need to agree on a client ID, client secret, redirect URIs. There's a ton of configuration parameters that needs to match on both sides. And then after 3 months or 6 months or whatever you use, the client secret expires. And it's time to change that. I mean, Microsoft Entra ID allows you to set, by default, says 180 days on the client secret lifetime. So it's a bit of headache to get this working. So once you're done, I completely realize you are happy. And then your manager comes along and says, hey, you were so great at that. We have now the client application. Can you please connect it to all 3 of them? And this is typical NXM problem in software. So what do we do when we have that kind of problems in software? Well, we reduce this complexity with a hub and spoke architecture. We introduce our own OpenID provider in the middle, which is called the Federation Gateway. So our client applications now only need to interact with our OpenID provider, and then it's up to the OpenID provider to once and for all connect to the upstream providers and handle them. A very common application scenario. So this works well. Let's see. Let's see if the demo gods are with me this time. Let's go from secure. I actually signed up to a few of them. Let's do the Entra ID common endpoint. I'll use test.net and hey, where is my? Oh, no. Redetail login fails. Thank you. Log in. So I can log in using my Entra ID provider. It's a single connection from my Web 2. If I go to click secure now, I'm immediately signed on because it just bounces off my Federation Gateway. We can see that it was test user from test tenant I have. So that's fairly neat, isn't it? If upper management comes around and adds more providers, you just add them in one place in the external provider. This also means that this is an integration on the edge of our organization where we probably want to validate the external identities before we use them in our external systems. We want to clean them up, make sure the claim names, everything does fit our standards, so it's a standardized view when we get down to our client applications. And all of that can be done on the Federation Gateway. So this means less validation and life is easier for the client applications. So everything works fine, and then someone is signed in like this. 2 client application of ours, the Federation Gateway, Entra ID, and some Microsoft 365 online applications belonging to the Entra ID session. Now the user clicks Logout. What should we do? So we know already that we can't just log out of the local application, because if we do that, then the user will immediately bounce back. We need at least this step to log out of the Federation Gateway. But now, should we take the step forward to log out all the way here? I mean, if this is a travel expense application that you would be using in your company, you find the travel expenses, you click Logout when you're done with your travel expenses, you switch tabs, go to continue working on SharePoint. Would you be expected to be logged out of SharePoint because you logged out of the travel expense application? No. So to not upset users, it's common to stop here. But that has another drawback. Problem is that it's 22nd in the morning. The travel expenses as sustains are due in like 5-10 minutes. I need to get my travel expenses filed now if I want the payout in May. My computer is busy over there presenting. Anyone would dare to lend me their computer? It's not dangerous. Okay, so I assume someone here would be nice and would lend me a computer. So I get that computer. I log in to the travel expense application on my the borrowed computer. I get logged in all the way to Entra ID because that's where sign-in happens. When I'm done, I do click Logout, and I'm logged out of the travel expense application, the Federation Gateway. It says you are now logged out. I hand back the computer. When I do that, is that really safe for me to do? No. You wouldn't do anything bad to my emails and documents, would you? Maybe, okay, that's why I should never trust you. So in that case, we want the full federated sign-out where we redirect all the way to the Entra ID that can clean up its session, notify its clients, redirect back, notify other clients in the session, and finally redirect back to the place where we did push logout. So we can do the full thing, but if we do the full thing, it will probably upset corporate users that are unexpectedly signed out to SharePoint. If we do not do the full thing, we'll put users at risk if they are on a shared device. So I'm sorry, pick one of the two bad options. There is no good option here. What you can do is maybe ask the user in the middle, do you want to sign out of everything? You could try clever tricks by checking auth time to see if there already was an Entra ID session or if we created a new session, but it's brittle. Also, on the technical side, it tends to be brittle. But if I do click, let's bring up the browser dev tools to see everything that happens. If I do click Logout now, we see that it happened quite a few things. You saw that I had logout on the web application. It ended up on the Entra ID logout page where it made a short break or pause. That was when it was running any front channel logouts and notifications. And then it redirected back to the end identity server, our Federation Gateway. So where are we? First, the end session is on our Federation Gateway. We were on the end session endpoint on login Microsoft Online. We were back at the logged out page of identity server that notified the client applications, and finally we got back, clicked at the link, and got all the way back. So it works. We can try it again using another provider. So this is an upstream identity server provider where I now get to click twice to get back. I could try it with the Google account, but it doesn't work because Google doesn't offer an end session endpoint. They don't want you to log out. I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's a very deliberate choice for them to not support logout. So let's see another problem or challenge we have. So this is our Federation Gateway setup. Our client application redirects to the OpenID provider. And now the OpenID provider needs to redirect, our Federation Gateway provider needs to redirect to the right upstream provider. It can't be that hard. You just show a bunch of buttons, right? This is an actual application. And this is a valid, in my opinion, correct user experience. Because this is a consumer-facing application where the user is given the choice. Please use the login method of your choice. This site does not offer passwords because people lose their passwords, but you can log in using Facebook, Google, Microsoft, what people are likely to have. Nowadays, it should also add Apple ID because people tend to be in the Android camp, then they have a Google account, or the iPhone camp, and then they have an Apple ID where they are signed on, and everyone uses their mobile for everything. So this works well. in this case, when there's an actual choice of the user. But in some cases, it's not a choice for the user. It's a necessity. So imagine if I have a system in Sweden where I need to select the municipality where I live to sign on. So we could have a list, and this is just the start of the list. So we can have a list and ask the user to find their municipality and log in. This is an actual UI from an actual system I have to use occasionally. So no, this is maybe not the best UI. This also means that if I would ever start a competitor to this particular solution, I know where to find potential customers. It's just to go to the login page and get the list of all the customers. So we need something better. One way to do it is to supply each customer with a unique starting link, and then we can restrict. So if you go to alphaexample.com to initiate the client app, that automatically routes to the right Entra ID, and betaexample.com maps to an instance of the Duende identity server somewhere. That's one way to do it. Another one is to do the way that Microsoft does, the home realm discovery, where we enter an email address. And then based on the email address, it redirects somewhere else. I think this is usually the most elegant. But unfortunately, it still leaks information. Let's go here. Oh, it's in Swedish because settings, but I assume you get the gist. Does this page leak information in any way? Can we get any information out of this? Well, we can't get the list, but we can try. Let's see. I've heard about a guy called Larry. He founded a company called Oracle. And I've heard he's not friends with Bill. But actually, he signed up. We can even see that he signed up the entirety of Oracle. So if I click the link to sign in, it redirects to the Oracle Cloud provider to sign in. So the oracle.com domain is mapped. There is an Entra ID tenant, obviously, for oracle.com, and is mapped to the Oracle Cloud provider system. So whatever we do leak information. There is no way around that. So the final pattern I want to talk a bit about is multi-tenancy. So this is a scenario if you build multi-tenanted software as a service environment where each customer you have multiple customer and the data should be isolated depending on what customer the user belongs to. One way to do that is you have our client that interacts with our provider. We just have a user table where we have a tenant ID or tenant listed for every user in the directory. It's just another column in the database. When we sign in, we add a tenant claim to the ID token. So there will be a claim in the client application session saying what tenant it is, and then on all data inside the system, we need to just have that tenant. Every single database table will now need a tenant ID column. It's a simple way to do it. It also has the advantage that if you ever have a situation where you have partners, brokers, support staff that need to do cross-tenancy access, it's very simple because you can assign someone permissions to look at data from all tenants. Often life isn't that simple with just a very clear distinction between tenants. It could be a corporate group with different legal entities. Each entity is their own tenant, but then the group management should be able to do reporting across all tenants or all companies within the group. Then this setup allows to do that. But it doesn't provide a high level of isolation between the tenants, though. I had once a customer working with sensitive personal information about the users of their users of the customers. They had a requirement to keep the data separated. And they also had the requirement that they should be able to easily export data for a specific tenant and to then remove it permanently and prove to the customer that we no longer have access to your data. What they did was another setup. So they created, for each an instance of an OpenID Connect provider, with a single user, and they signed it an issue. So this was idpsustainability.com. We no longer need a tenant ID claim. The tenant is set by the issuer. And we just have a database that just contains the orders of this tenant. And then we have another logical instance with the users who run the software. And this allowed this customer, thanks to this, it allowed them to back up the database separately for each tenant, and they could drop the database. So if you cancel the services with this company, what they did was actually they said that, hey, sorry to see you go. Do you want a copy of your data before you leave? Most customers said yes. So it was, yeah, here we ship your database backup. By the way, we are now erasing this. So the backup file you just received is the only place where this data still exists. If you would ever come back to us and want to resume the services, you need to send us back that database backup file if you want us to reload the data into the system. I like this. But this has another drawback. What about the cross-tenancy data access if we need that? Well, we can put up a relationship between the providers so they trust each other. But that would still be like you are a guest in the other provider. Other provider. One advantage here, though, is that since these are two logically different providers on different domain names, you can be signed in on both on the same time with different accounts. In the first case, where we had a single OpenID provider, then typically you can only be signed into one account at a time on that provider. So there are pros and cons. This also works better for white label solutions. Imagine if you have a company that produce, you produce a ticket system for venues. So you sell a ticket. So let's say Oslo Spectrum wants a ticketing system for all the events happening here. And they want it to be possible to go to NDCOslo.com to purchase NDC tickets, and then go to another site for a concert to purchase tickets for the concert. It's actually the same system running, just different design. In that case, this allows you to have a completely different design on each of them. Users will sign up to each tenant separately. It's a separate user database. Because I would be utterly confused if I could sign in with my NDC attendance account when I went here to buy concert tickets. So multi-tenancy, one of those things where there's not a single definition to what multi-tenancy is. There are multiple ways to do it, and multiple ways to handle it, depending on the situation. So asking the question, does an OpenID provider's product support multi-tenancy? Well, most say yes, but it probably means they support one of the models. One that is widespread that I want to mention is Microsoft Entra ID, where a client can actually interact with multiple Entra ID instances or tenants. Microsoft has solved this by setting up a virtual tenant, the common endpoint. So the client application makes a request to sign in to the shared tenant, and then the response actually comes back directly from another tenant. This is not exactly how I would design it. If we look at the setup of OpenID Connect for Entra ID in my identity server, we can even see that on this, I had to set validate issuer to false, because I make a request to the common issuer, and the response comes directly from the specific tenant. Now, I would prefer to do it this way. Introduce your own identity provider, let your client application interact directly with its home tenant, and then it's up to the OpenID Provider layer to talk to other. This is essentially the federation gateway pattern, again, just drawn in different order. So to summarize, what we've seen is that we can do sign on to an application. We can single sign on another application. We can use the federation gateway pattern to make it easier to connect our client applications to more upstream providers. We can use multiple instances or logical instances to implement multi-tenancy. And we saw firsthand that Logout is hard because my demo broke. Actually, I want to make one quick try at fixing that. Let's see if it works, if we get to my main. So that one is launching, that was launching. Now they should all be running off the main branch, which is my backup branch for when I screw up the demo. No promises that it will work with, though. We're not signed in anywhere. Let's sign in. And let's do the end-to-end server as the upstream this time. Web 2 secure. If I do click Logout here, and I return. Yeah, it worked in that branch. I did something. I forgot something, obviously. So what happened is that I had the callback happening. So let's just redo that then. Secure, I'll log in locally here. Secure. So if I press Logout here, I want to check on this page to show you that on this page in the iframe, there is a notification back to Web 1. The end-to-end server actually notifies the client that made the Logout request, just out of being. It doesn't matter to log out twice, I guess. But there is no request to localhost 5002 where I run my Web 2 application. But still, if I go here, I'm still logged in. Okay, I have some debugging to do. It worked the previous time, right? I have some debugging to do. I'll fix that, I promise. And I've pushed the buggy solution to OIDCpatterns.com already to my GitHub account, which means that you will be able to find the commit and find the bug and have a good laugh afterwards to see what I did wrong. So we have time for some questions. Any questions or comments? Yes?
So about the sign-on, what if our client is not a web client, something like the mobile client, then is the refresh token mechanism is a good way, or?
So the question was that what if the client is not a web client, it's a native client, and you have a refresh token that essentially represents the session. So first of all, if it's a native client on my mobile phone, typically using OpenID Connect, when I first install the client application, it will pop up, open the browser where I do the sign in the browser, or this custom Chrome tabs or AS Web Authentication session on iOS, which is this. You probably recognize it. It looks like a browser, but you can't change the address bar. And you sign in, and you get single sign-on, at least on Android, with your existing account, because it shares the cookie container with the system browser. And then you go on with your life, and you probably have your application for months, something like that. By then, the the session on the OpenID provider has already timed out since long, so it's probably gone. In that case, your session is represented by a refresh token in your client app. In that case, there is maybe not so much things on it, but in some cases you do want single logout. The way to do it is that just like with back-channel logout, we had this logout, we had the session ID as the key. A refresh token is associated with the session ID that was used to create it. So on logout, at least in the end ident server, there is a session, coordinate session. There is a session coordinate something, which you can enable that says that when you log out the session, any refresh tokens that were created from that session are also revoked. And that will effectively cause the client to be logged out. But there is no notification mechanism normally this way. And the problem is that on the web, everything runs on the same address. But there is no way to have a push notification to your phone from the native app. So the way it's done is to revoke the refresh token. And once more, it shows that logout is tricky because what does it mean in your specific scenario and context? So, any other questions? Yes, we're all done then. So I'm up for some debugging and hope you have a nice day at the conference. Thank you very much.